People don't usually come up to the rooftop. It's not exactly inviting, just rusted wire, peeling paint, and the constant coo of feathers. But to me, it's everything. My little kingdom above the noise. I spend my mornings up here, watching the world move below, feeding the pigeons, mending cages, thinking in silence. No one bothers me. Not usually. That day was strange from the start. The sun hadn't even broken fully, but the heat had already begun to rise in waves. I was ankle-deep in seed sacks when I heard someone behind me clear their throat, low and quiet, like he wasn't sure he belonged. I turned. He was standing just inside the roof's entrance, one hand gripping the chipped brick wall, the other shading his eyes against the light. Tall but not imposing. His jacket looked too heavy for the heat. There was something worn in his posture, like he'd been walking a long time with a story that wouldn't settle. "Sorry to bother you," he said. "I heard you keep pigeons." I nodded, brushing the seed dust off my palms. "I do." He stepped forward, gaze scanning the cages. "I'm looking for a pair. Pigeons. A matched set." I raised an eyebrow. "For breeding?" "No," he said. "Just a pair. They don't have to do anything. Just be together." There was a pause. Not the usual kind people fill with small talk. His eyes were steady, but there was something behind them, some quiet urgency I couldn't name. "I'll give you the pigeons," I said slowly, "but I have to do my work." He nodded like that made sense, like he expected to wait. He didn't ask questions, didn't pace or check his phone. He just stood by the edge of the roof, staring out across the city, hands in his pockets. I finished scattering the feed, checked on one of the cages that had a loose wire, and gave one of the older birds some water. All the while, I felt him there, his presence settling in like late afternoon sun, warm but not pressing. When I was done, I picked two birds, a gray and white pair that had always perched together, never more than a few inches apart. They'd been with me a long time. I hesitated for half a breath before gently placing them in a box lined with soft cloth. He stepped forward and took the box from me carefully, like it held something fragile and holy. "Thank you. I don't usually give them away," I admitted, more to myself than to him. He looked up. "Then why did you?" I didn't have a clean answer. Something about him made me want to give. Not in the way that weakens you, but in the way you do when someone reminds you you're still human. "I guess I thought you'd take care of them," I said. A small smile flickered across his face, then vanished. "I will." He lingered a moment longer, then turned and disappeared down the stairs without another word. Just like that, gone. I stood there for a while after he left, unsure what had just passed between us. There was nothing grand or obvious, just a few exchanged words and a quiet sense that something had shifted. The rooftop felt different after that, like the air carried more weight. For the next few days, I went about my routines like usual. Mornings with the pigeons, afternoons sketching on the fire escape, evenings lost in books and black coffee. But I couldn't stop thinking about him. I didn't even know his name, and yet I'd given him two of my oldest companions without question. I kept replaying the moment, how still he'd been, how his voice didn't quite match his eyes. People don't usually come up to the rooftop, but he had, and I hadn't told him no. It wasn't until the 5th day, just as I was climbing the steps with a bag of grain slung over my shoulder, that I saw him again. He was already there, sitting on the ledge, one foot dangling over the side, the pigeon box beside him, empty. He turned when he heard me, gave a small nod. "I brought them back," he said quietly. "But they flew," and I didn't know if he was talking about the birds or something else entirely. His name was Cole Merritt. He told me the second time he came to the roof, as if it didn't matter, as if names were just something people expected to exchange. He said it like a footnote. Then he asked if he could help carry the seed bags. I didn't say yes, but I didn't stop him either. He moved like he knew labor, shoulders used to weight, hands that had gripped cold things, heavy things. He didn't speak much, just worked quietly beside me. When he did speak, it was always softly, like the words were for himself, and I just happened to be there. Over the next few weeks, Cole kept coming back. Not every day, but often enough that I started expecting him. He always arrived near dusk, when the light was gold and the pigeons cast long shadows against the cages. Sometimes he brought coffee. Sometimes he brought silence. I liked both. He started asking questions. How I got into keeping pigeons, what they remembered, how long they stayed loyal. I told him pigeons never forget where home is. If you care for them, they'll always return. He didn't say anything for a long time after that. Just watched one of the younger birds struggle through its first awkward flight. Then he said, almost absently, I used to watch my brother raise pigeons. Back before things got quiet. I glanced at him, but his face gave nothing away. Is he still around? No, he said. Not anymore. That was the end of it. No dramatic pause, no elaborate story. Just enough to make the rooftop feel like it wasn't mine alone anymore. One evening, I found him sketching in a worn notebook while I cleaned the feeders. I looked over his shoulder, just a glance, and saw the outline of a bird mid-flight, wings stretched wide, chest torn open like it had been split by wind or memory. You draw? I asked. Sometimes, he said, mostly when I can't sleep. I didn't push. We didn't need to fill space. That was something I'd come to appreciate with him. He never demanded noise. The first time our hands touched, it wasn't even intentional. We both reached for the latch on the cage door, fingers brushing. The contact was brief, but it stayed with me. A sharp, silent imprint. I looked at him. He looked back. No words, just air moving differently between us. Something shifted after that. He started staying longer, helping me paint the aviary walls. We argued over colors. He liked faded greens. I preferred soft gray. We compromised with a shade that looked like a cloud trying not to rain. We shared stories. I told him about the time I got locked out of the building with birdseed in my hair and a broken key. He laughed, really laughed, for the first time, his head tilted back, eyes crinkling at the edges. It felt like sunshine you weren't expecting. He never talked about his family beyond the brother, but I could tell there was more. His eyes always looked like they were remembering something that didn't want to be remembered. One night, we sat shoulder to shoulder on the edge of the roof, watching the city lights flicker on like stars being shaken out of a jar. I wanted to ask him if he felt it too, whatever this was between us. But I didn't. I've always been cautious with good things. I've learned they don't always stay. Instead, I offered him one of my poems. Not out loud, just on paper. Folded, quiet, left next to his coffee cup. He never mentioned it, but he took it with him. Then came the shift. It started with a silence that didn't belong. He missed 2 evenings in a row, then 3. When he finally returned, his eyes felt distant, his voice thinner. You okay? I asked. He nodded but didn't meet my gaze. Just tired. I wanted to believe him. Maybe I would have if I hadn't seen him later that week, down on the street, leaning against a black car, talking to Jesse Vaughn. It stopped me cold. Jesse and I hadn't spoken in over 2 years. We'd been close once, too close, until something in me scared him off. He called me intense, said I felt too much, too fast. Then he vanished, and now he was standing there with Cole, heads bent in quiet conversation, the kind that holds history. I ducked back behind the stairwell wall before either of them could look up. I didn't ask Cole about it. I told myself it didn't mean anything. People run into people. Coincidences happen. But something in the air had changed. When he came back to the roof, he didn't bring coffee. He didn't sit close. His silences grew heavier, harder to sit beside. Still, I held on to the rhythm we'd built, even as it faltered. I fed the pigeons. I painted over peeling corners. I waited. Sometimes I think we know when something is slipping through our hands, but we grip tighter anyway, pretending we don't feel the loss until it's already flown. Cole's absences grew longer. Days passed without a word, then a week. When he did return, it was without explanation, like time hadn't moved at all. He still helped carry the grain, still asked about the pigeons, but something vital had drained from him, like the thread that tethered him to the rooftop was beginning to fray. I told myself not to notice, that people had their seasons, but I wasn't built for pretending. I watched him more closely now, the way he kept checking his phone, how his hands moved restlessly while I spoke. Even the pigeons seemed to sense the shift. They flew in tighter circles, perched farther away when he came close. One afternoon, I came up to the rooftop and found a white pigeon lying on the gravel near the cages. Its wings were curled in, still as stone. No blood, no signs of a fight, just silence. It was one of the 2 I'd given to Cole the first day we met. I stared at it for a long time, unsure what to feel. A part of me wanted to believe it was coincidence a cruel trick of the wind. But something in my gut twisted. This wasn't how pigeons returned. They didn't come back to die. I buried it in the small square of dirt behind a shed, near where the rosemary grew wild. I didn't tell Cole. When he finally showed again, I tried to meet him where he was. I offered him a brush, pointed to a section of the aviary we hadn't repainted yet. He took it, but half-heartedly, dragging the strokes like he couldn't decide if he wanted to finish or leave it half done. We worked in silence for a while, the only sound the rustling of feathers and distant traffic below. Do you ever feel like you're losing something without knowing what it is? I asked, wiping paint from my wrist. He didn't answer right away, just kept painting. Sometimes, he said, sometimes I think I never had it to begin with. I turned toward him. Is that how you feel now? He didn't look at me. You're too intense, Micah. The words didn't just land. They crashed. I knew those words. I'd heard them before, 2 years ago, from Jesse, right before he cut me out of his life without explanation. Back then, I thought maybe I was too much. Now I wasn't sure if it was me or if they just didn't know how to stay. I thought this meant something, I said quietly. Cole set the brush down. It did. Maybe it still does. But not everything that means something is meant to last. He didn't say goodbye, just laughed like always. Like the door didn't need closing if it had never been opened. I didn't chase him. That night, I stayed on the roof long after dark. The sky was too cloudy for stars, but I watched the city flicker and pulse beneath me. I imagined the streets where Cole might be walking, the conversations he might be having, the laughter he might be sharing with someone who wasn't me. I started writing again. Not poems this time, but thoughts scattered and unfiltered. I wrote about birds and hands and silence. I wrote about giving things away without knowing their cost. I wrote about Jesse's smile and Cole's eyes, and how they both had a way of vanishing without noise. The next morning, the pigeons flew out in a wide arc, cutting through the sky with ease. I watched them go, wondering which ones would return. I realized I didn't know anymore which birds were his and which were mine. Later that week, I saw them again, Cole and Jesse, on the other side of the street outside the coffee shop I used to visit. They didn't see me. Cole was laughing, his hand brushing Jesse's arm. They stood too close. Familiar. I felt like I'd been standing in an open field waiting for a storm, and the first crack of thunder had finally come. I turned away before they looked up, heart pounding with a strange mixture of anger and ache. It wasn't just that he'd chosen someone else. It was that he'd taken the quiet we'd built and handed it to the one person who knew exactly how to break me. Back on the roof, I found one of the pigeons perched alone, feathers ruffled, its eyes watching me as if it understood. I reached out, let it climb into my hand. It didn't resist. I stood there, holding it, the city humming below, my heart too loud in my chest. Cole had asked for 2 pigeons, but I'd given him more than that. I'd given him time, trust, the kind of closeness you don't name because naming it makes it real. And now, all I had left were feathers and silence. The next time I saw Cole, it was the last time. I hadn't planned on seeing him again. I'd made peace with his absence the way you do with a healed scar. You don't touch it, you just let it fade. But the city has a strange way of folding paths over each other, like paper creased too many times. I was walking home from the supply store, a bag of grain slung over my shoulder, when I caught sight of them across the street. Cole and Jesse. They stood outside an old bookstore, half hidden by ivy and neon. Cole had his head tilted back, laughing, that same easy smile I'd seen bloom on the rooftop. Jesse touched his arm, and Cole didn't pull away. In fact, he leaned closer. I stopped, just stood there in the middle of the sidewalk, people flowing around me like water around a stone. I don't know how long I watched. Maybe just a few seconds. Maybe long enough to understand that whatever I'd shared with Cole had become something else. Something easier, maybe safer, with someone who already knew how to hurt me. I turned before they saw me and walked home with my eyes on the cracks in the pavement. Each step felt heavier than the one before, as if my body finally understood what my heart had already learned. When I reached the building, I didn't go straight to the roof. I sat on the stairs, the grain bag still looped over my shoulder, and stared at my hands. They were raw from the rope handles. My fingers were flecked with dust. And for the first time in weeks, I didn't want to climb. Eventually, I did. The rooftop greeted me like it always had, quiet, sun-warmed, loyal. The pigeons fluttered in their cages, cooing softly as if they knew. I walked to the far edge where the brick ledge curved into the sky and let the bag slide from my shoulder. The memory of Cole's first visit washed over me, his careful voice, the way he held the box like it contained something sacred. I remembered his silence, his eyes, the question that didn't need words. Will you give me something I don't know how to ask for? And I had. I pulled out a sheet of paper from my back pocket, unfolded it with steady hands. It was the letter I'd written the night I buried the white pigeon. I hadn't meant to keep it, but I did. You asked me for 2 pigeons. I gave them, but I also gave you the part of me that still believed love could be simple. You didn't take that gently. I folded the letter again and tucked it under the brick where the birds like to perch. It didn't matter if he read it. It wasn't for him anymore. It was for me. The next morning, I opened every cage. Let every pigeon fly. They hesitated, unsure. Then, one by one, they lifted into the air, wings slicing through golden light. It wasn't chaotic. It was quiet, beautiful, like something being returned to itself. I watched them go until they became specks in the sky, then shadows, then nothing at all. My heart ached, not with loss, but with release. In the days that followed, I rebuilt the rooftop, cleaned out old nests, reinforced the netting, painted the far wall a color that reminded me of smoke before rain. A color that couldn't be named, only felt. Cole didn't come back. Jesse didn't either. I didn't expect them to. Sometimes I thought about what might have been if Cole had stayed, if Jesse had never reappeared. But then I'd see a pigeon land, one of mine, maybe a stranger, and I'd remember that love isn't something you hold onto with closed fists. It's something you let fly, even when you're not sure it'll return. I still keep pigeons. Fewer now. I don't name them. I just care for them quietly like before. Some evenings, when the sky turns orange and the city hums beneath me, I think about him, his voice, the way he stood on the roof like he'd never belonged anywhere until then. I wonder if he ever thinks of me. But I don't wait. Love taught me that waiting can feel like hope until it becomes a cage. I'm done with cages. Now, I just open the door and watch the sky.